To get started, you need some simple tools. Since everything is metric, 2 adjustable wrenches work rather well. In this case, we have a 10-inch and an 8-inch. First thing to do is to identify your 4 leveling jacks and their locking collars. Screw the collars onto the stem of the jack, screw the jack into the corner, lock the collar down. Next thing to do is to identify the center pivot, which is a piece of M16 threaded rod. Screw on one nut and then thread the rod into the base until it's flush with the bottom. Then tighten this nut. Take one of your wrenches, make it snug. This will keep things from moving. Next, find your trim collar. Slide the trim collar over. Then take one of the bearing assemblies, slide that over. Next, locate your cradle, slide that over the top, and now put your other bearing over. Point of reference, the bearings are 3 pieces: a bottom race, a top race, and then a ball bearing set. You notice that the bracket that holds the bearings is open on one side, closed on the other. The closed side goes up, just like that. Now find 2 other M16 nuts. Just thread them on just like this. Now tighten the bottom nut so it's just touching, and then back it off about 1/8 of a turn. Now hold back on it with the one wrench. Take the other wrench, tighten the top nut, so we jam one nut against the other. This way they don't back off and everything spins nice and free. Next step, find your radius plate. That's this guy right here. Got to pay attention to this hole. There are 2 small holes and 1 large hole. The large hole must align with the hole that's in the cradle. If it doesn't, you have to take everything apart and turn the radius plate back over. Fit it right in here. Take your small bolts, screw them right in just like this. One. That's 2. Now before you tighten this up, take a good look and make sure that this lines up. And it does. The hole goes right through. This is exactly what you want. Take your wrench, sides it there. Tighten these up so they're snug. They have lock washers, so they don't have to be really deadly tight. Now, take your axial rail assemblies. The axial rail assemblies are left and right specific. This particular one is the right side rail assembly. You can see here it has a fitting on it, an arm with 2 threaded holes, an outer one and an inner one. For the purpose of assembly, we're dealing with the inner one. What we're going to do is we're going to put this right in here, and we're going to take this next to the bottom hole. You see the whole series of round holes here? The next to the bottom round hole. And we're going to put our locking knob in there and screw it into the inner threaded hole on the rail assembly. Now we're going to take the left-hand rail assembly and we do exactly the same thing with it. I'm going to fit it right in there next to the bottom hole, inner threaded hole. It'll fit right in between. Tighten that in. Now, what you couldn't see before, but you'll be able to see now, is on each of these rail assemblies, there's a set of bushings. When we lock it in like this, since the tooling we use to manufacture this and the fixtures are so precise, when you do that, and you cock the 2 of the rail assemblies together, these guys line right up. Not only do they line up on each other, just like the hinges on a door, but they line up with the 2 holes in the cradle. And we take our long bolt, make sure there's a washer on this end, and we can thread this right through the bushings both ends of the cradle. Look at that, comes right out the other end. Put on a washer, tighten it up, put a wrench on each end, and just snug it up. You just don't want it to walk out. This happens to be an M12 insert lock nut. We'll be referring to these later on because we use them at the ends of the rail assemblies. Now, you have everything firmly in place. The next step is to go to the vises. These vises are special. They are self-centering. And what that means is when you tighten them, both halves tighten together at the same time, and it centers your work automatically. We'll do more on that a little bit later. The important thing that you have to know about these vises right now is that the threaded end, we're going to put on the crank and hand wheel assembly, is left-hand thread. The nuts for it are left-hand thread. These are M12 left-hand hex nuts. Don't lose them. First thing to do is to turn the vise shaft counterclockwise so the vise is all the way to the outer position. This will make things a little bit easier. Take your nut, screw it on. You're not going to screw it clockwise, you're going to screw it counterclockwise. Now, counterclockwise is probably going to be difficult for those of us who grew up in a digital world, but be that as it may, now take your crank handle, screw that on counterclockwise. Just like that. See how I'm doing this? And screw it on until there's about 1/8 to 1/4 inch of thread showing here in the hub. Now, take your other nut and turn it until it comes right up against the hub. Take a wrench, hold back on the nut, and now you turn your hand wheel. Just take it with your hand here and hold back on the nut and turn it counterclockwise until it's good and snug. Now let's install the vises onto the rails. You can face the hand wheel either way, it doesn't matter, whatever suits you. Slide the tubes over the rails, engage the insert lock nuts, make them nice and snug. But once they meet resistance, you could tighten them about 1/2 or 1/4 of a turn and they'll stay in place. Now put the other vise on exactly the same way. Tighten the nuts the same way. And good to go. Now, to keep the vises from sliding, you can use these little locking knobs and they'll lock it right in place, it won't move. You only need to use one knob. However, we put fixtures for 2 knobs on each one. Depending exactly how you configure your vise, you may want to use one or the other. Now these vises are really special. Pay attention to them as we work with them here. As you close the vise, both halves move together at exactly the same rate and they meet exactly in the center. And this is the same for the other vise also. So what that means is that when you put your gun in this vise and you close up the one vise and the other vise, the gun is always centered, dead center. You don't have to fiddle around. That's different from a conventional vise where one jaw remains stationary and the other one moves. You'd constantly be shifting things around to get things properly centered. In addition, each vise has a floor plate. Actually, it has 2 of them. It has a wide one and it has a narrow one. And these go right over the metal parts on the bottom of the vise, and each one has a 12mm thick foam pad on it. That's where you put your weapon in there, nothing contacts the metal in the vise. In addition, the jaws of the vise each have a 1/2 inch thick foam pad to protect the weapon. Going beyond that, most of the upper surfaces where you might have the potential for contact with your gun to the metal, like here, 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 and here, it's also foam padded. To change from maintenance configuration to sighting configuration, remove the large bolt at the center, put the cradle and upper assembly back over the base, insert the large hex bolt, and tighten. Snug it up with a wrench, and you're good to go. The base is manufactured with a tab at each of the 4 corners, and that tab has a 1/4 inch 6mm hole in it, so you can screw this down to a bench top. If that's not practical, you might want to screw it down to a piece of plywood.